Go ahead, old-timer. Show us how it's done. The words, slick with the casual cruelty of youth, dripped from the lance corporal's lips. He and his fellow Marines, barely out of their teens, leaned against the cold steel flank of a modern Abrams tank, their digital camouflage a stark contrast to the olive-drab relic before them. They were watching an 80-year-old man, his back stooped and his hands spotted with age, shuffle towards the silent, hulking form of an M4 Sherman. The old tank sat like a forgotten gravestone in the middle of the motor pool at Camp Pendleton, stubbornly refusing to start for the base's annual historical vehicle parade. The mechanics had given up, blaming corroded wiring and an engine that hadn't truly roared in half a century. The young Marines found the whole situation hilarious. The old man, Arthur Gales, simply nodded, his face a roadmap of wrinkles that betrayed nothing. He had heard worse. He had survived worse. This was just noise. But as he placed a trembling hand on the cold steel of the Sherman, a memory, sharp and violent, flashed behind his eyes. The smell of cordite, the scream of metal, the rumble of this very beast beneath him. He was not just touching a museum piece, he was touching a ghost. If you believe every scar tells a story and that honor is earned in silence, not shouted from a stage, then type honor in the comments below. Arthur Gales lived a life of quiet routine. His small apartment was neat, sparse, and smelled faintly of coffee and old books. Mornings were for a slow walk to the corner store for a newspaper he'd read cover to cover. Afternoons were for sitting on his porch, watching the world go by, a world that had long since forgotten the thunderous rhythm of his youth. He was a phantom, a living relic most people looked right through. His neighbors saw a kindly but frail old man. The cashier at the store saw a customer who always paid in exact change. No one saw the tank commander. No one saw the steady hand that had once guided 70,000 pounds of American steel through the frozen hell of the Ardennes forest. He never spoke of it. The medals were tucked away in a dusty box, the memories locked behind eyes that had seen too much. He had been invited to the base today as a local veteran, a token gesture he usually declined. But something about the mention of the Sherman, the specific model they were trying to display, had pulled him from his quiet world. It was his tank. Not the exact one, of course, that one lay scattered in a Belgian field, but its identical twin, a brother in steel and spirit. The situation was becoming a spectacle. A small crowd had gathered. The base mechanics, frustrated and greasy, threw their hands up in defeat. The ignition system is shot, one of them declared to a harried-looking captain. We'd have to rebuild the whole thing. It's not moving today. That's when the laughter started. Lance Corporal Davis, puffed up with the unearned confidence of a man who'd only ever known computer-assisted targeting systems, pointed a thumb at the Sherman. Look at that thing. A tin can. My granddad said you could punch through one of these with a German 88 from a mile away. His friend, Corporal Miller, chimed in, "Why even bother? We should just tow the fossil to the parade ground." It was then that Arthur, who had been watching from a distance, began his slow, deliberate walk toward the tank. He moved with the careful gait of a man whose joints ached with the memory of cold, damp nights spent sleeping on an engine block. "Excuse me," he said, his voice raspy with disuse. "I might be able to help." Davis turned, a smirk spreading across his face. He looked Arthur up and down, taking in the worn corduroy jacket, the faded slacks, and the orthopedic shoes. With what pop? Finding the lost and found. Arthur ignored him, his eyes fixed on the Sherman's engine access panel. "The magneto timing is probably off," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. "And you have to prime the cylinders manually." The automatic primer on these Wright Continentals was always the first thing to fail in the cold. The captain, desperate for any solution that didn't involve paperwork explaining a failed event, looked from the defeated mechanics to the quiet old man. "You know about these engines?" Arthur gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "I've spent some time in one," that was all he offered. The understatement was so profound it was almost a physical force in the air, but it was completely lost on the young Marines. "Oh, this is going to be good," Miller whispered to Davis, pulling out his phone to record. World's strongest grandpa versus the Iron Giant. The captain, against his better judgment, sighed. All right, sir. Give it a shot. Can't make it any more broken. It was that casual dismissal, that patronizing permission, that finally sparked a tiny flicker of the old fire in Arthur's chest. He didn't say a word. He simply walked to the side of the tank and asked a mechanic for a wrench and a hand crank. He moved with a sudden, surprising purpose. His stooped shoulders seemed to straighten. His hands, though wrinkled, were steady and sure as he unlatched the heavy access panel. The Marines continued their quiet jeers, their words like gnats buzzing around a lion. Arthur was deaf to them. He was in his element, the familiar scent of oil, gasoline, and cold steel filling his senses. It was a smell he thought he'd left behind in 1945. He worked methodically, his movements economical and precise. He didn't fumble. He didn't hesitate. He knew this machine not from a manual, but from a deep, intimate, life-or-death familiarity. He checked the fuel lines, bled a bit of air from the system, and then adjusted something deep within the engine's guts, a part the younger mechanics hadn't even known was adjustable. All the while, the snickering continued. "Hey, careful you don't break a hip in there." Grandpa Arthur pulled his head out from the engine bay, his face now smudged with grease. He looked less like a frail pensioner and more like a ghost from a black-and-white photograph. As he reached into his jacket pocket for a rag to wipe his hands, a small, dark object fell out, clattering softly on the concrete. It was a tarnished, dented piece of metal on a thin chain. A dog tag. Davis, ever the antagonist, sauntered over and picked it up before Arthur could. He held it up, squinting in the bright California sun. "What have we got here?" he announced to the small crowd. "Property of Gales." He flipped it over. "Unit 761st TB. He pronounced it with mocking slowness. 761st T. B. Never heard of him. He tossed the tag back at Arthur's feet. Probably the Cook's battalion. The laughter that followed was sharp and cruel, but it was cut short by the sound of tires screeching to a halt. A black staff car with a general's 2-star flag on the fender had pulled up. The rear door opened and out stepped Major General Wallace, the base commander. He was a stern, imposing man in a perfectly pressed uniform, and he was not in a good mood. He was on his way to the parade grounds and had come to see why his prized historical exhibit was causing a delay. His eyes swept the scene. The silent tank, the greasy mechanics, the smirking young Marines, and the old man covered in grime. "Captain," he barked, "what is the meaning of this circus?" Before the captain could stammer out a reply, the general's gaze fell upon the dog tag still lying on the ground. He bent down and picked it up. As he read the stamped letters, the entire world seemed to stop. The color drained from his face. His stern expression dissolved into one of pure, unadulterated shock, followed by a wave of profound reverence. He looked from the tag in his hand to the old man standing silently by the tank. His eyes, which a moment ago were hard as flint, now held a look of awe. "Gales?" he whispered, his voice cracking slightly. 761st? He took a step forward, then another. He walked past the confused captain and the stunned Marines. He stopped directly in front of Arthur Gales, a man 30 years his senior, covered in grease, and without a word, the Major General snapped to the most rigid, respectful position of attention he had ever held. He raised his hand in a salute so sharp it could have cut glass. "Sergeant Gales," the general said, his voice now booming across the silent motor pool, filled with an emotion that no one present had ever heard from him. "It is an honor, sir." A profound honor. The young Marines stared, their mouths hanging open. Their brains struggled to process the image. A 2-star general saluting a disheveled old man. General Wallace held the salute for a long, painful moment before slowly lowering his hand. He turned to the bewildered Marines, and the fire returned to his eyes, now a white-hot inferno of rage. "You stand there and you smirk?" he hissed, his voice dangerously low. "You stand there on the soil of the United States Marine Corps and you mock this man? Do you have any idea who you are looking at?" He held up the dog tag. 761st Tank Battalion. Does that mean anything to you worthless children? No? Let me educate you. It was the first African-American armored unit to see combat in World War II. They were called the Black Panthers. Their motto was "Come out fighting." And that is exactly what they did. The general took a step closer to Davis and Miller, who looked like they wanted the earth to swallow them whole. They fought for 183 straight days from France through Belgium into Germany. They spearheaded Patton's Third Army. They fought in the Battle of the Bulge in blizzards with inferior tanks against superior German panzers. They fought for a country that still made them use separate bathrooms. They fought for the very freedom you take for granted every single day you put on that uniform. He pointed a trembling finger at Arthur. This man, Sergeant Arthur Gales, was a commander in that battalion. He and his crew, in a Sherman just like this one, are credited with destroying 6 enemy tanks and holding a critical crossroads against an entire SS Panzer column for 2 days, allowing Patton's infantry to escape encirclement. He was awarded the Silver Star for it, a medal that was lost in the mail for 50 years until a president finally pinned it on him. This man is not a relic. He is a titan. He is a living piece of American history. And you laughed at him. Silence. A thick, suffocating silence hung over the motor pool, broken only by the distant cry of a seagull. The faces of Lance Corporal Davis and Corporal Miller had turned from smug amusement to ashen shame. They stared at Arthur, truly seeing him for the first time, not as an old man, but as the hero the general had described. In that moment of crushing silence, Arthur turned back to the tank. He reached into the driver's compartment, his hand finding a small, hidden lever near the floor. He gave it a firm pull. He then grabbed the hand crank, fitted it to the engine, and gave it one powerful, decisive turn. There was a cough, a deep, guttural sputter. A cloud of black smoke erupted from the exhaust, smelling of decades of slumber. And then, with a deafening roar that shook the very concrete beneath their feet, the 70-year-old Wright Continental radial engine roared to life. The ground trembled. The Sherman, the forgotten ghost, was awake. Its voice was the thunder of a bygone war, a sound of pure, mechanical fury. Arthur, without a glance at the stunned audience, calmly climbed up the side of the hull and dropped into the commander's hatch, disappearing from view. A moment later, the turret began to traverse with a hydraulic whine, a salute of its own. The vindication was absolute. The roar of the engine was a verdict, a judgment on the ignorance and arrogance of the young Marines. Arthur, his head and shoulders now visible in the open hatch, expertly engaged the clutch. The tank lurched forward, its tracks clanking a rhythmic, powerful song on the pavement. He maneuvered the 35-ton machine with the grace of a ballet dancer, turning it in a tight circle before positioning it perfectly at the head of the parade lineup. He brought it to a halt, the engine rumbling with a steady, confident idle. He then shut it down, and the sudden silence was even more profound than the noise had been. He climbed out, wiping his greasy hands on the rag from his pocket as if he had just finished some minor gardening. The general was still standing there, his expression unreadable. The young Marines, led by a pale-faced Davis, approached him. They came to attention, their movements clumsy with shame. "Sir," Davis stammered, looking at the ground. "Sergeant Gales, sir. There's no excuse. What we said, what we did, was a disgrace. We are sorry. Truly sorry." Arthur looked at their young, scared faces. He saw not malice, but ignorance. He saw the same callow youth he remembered seeing in the mirror 70 years ago, before the war had burned it away. He nodded slowly. "The war is over, son," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "But respect, that's a battle you fight every day. Don't lose it." The parade was a success, but the main attraction wasn't the pristine modern equipment. It was the old M4 Sherman, rumbling along with Sergeant Arthur Gales sitting proudly in the commander's hatch, returning the salutes of everyone from privates to the base commander himself. The story spread like wildfire across the base and then, through social media, across the country. The video Miller had started recording to mock Arthur became a viral testament to his quiet dignity and hidden greatness. The next day, General Wallace held a formal ceremony on the parade ground. In front of the entire base, he personally rededicated the M4 Sherman, unveiling a new brass plaque on its hull. It no longer just listed the tank's specifications. It now told the story of Sergeant Arthur Gales and the heroic 761st Black Panthers Battalion. The resolution was more than just a single moment of restored dignity. Sparked a change. A new program was instituted on base, connecting young service members with veterans from previous generations, ensuring the lessons of the past were not forgotten. Lance Corporal Davis and Corporal Miller volunteered to lead the program. They spent every weekend at the museum, meticulously cleaning and maintaining the Sherman, their penance becoming a passion. Their respect was no longer offered out of fear of the general, but out of a genuine, hard-won understanding of the giant who walked among them. The most enduring image, however, was of Arthur Gales a week later. He wasn't at a ceremony or in a parade. He was back at the motor pool, standing beside the Sherman, patiently explaining the workings of the coaxial machine gun to a wide-eyed group of new recruits, the same age as the boys who had once laughed at him. He was no longer a ghost. He was a teacher, his legacy not just a memory of war, but a living lesson in honor. If you believe that true heroes don't wear capes but dog tags, and that we owe them a debt we can never fully repay, then subscribe to this channel for more stories that remind us of the giants who walk among us.